The next presentation will be by Quentin Hart. Quentin is the national manager of the project. I've gotten to work with Quentin quite closely this last few weeks getting ready for this event, and I'm highly impressed with his professionalism and dedication to this project. So, Quentin, over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to talk about the justification for managing feral camels at a national level as opposed to a property, regional or jurisdictional level. The concept of nationally significant pests in Australia first came about with origins in the consideration of weeds of national significance, with the first 20 species that were had to be prioritised under that first process. That was in 1999, and it was a world first, that kind of process about actually having some sort of transparent process for how you prioritise which pests are going to be focused on and invested in researching and managing. They are, in the weeds world, they obviously had a bit more of a challenge in terms of prioritising those species than we do in the pest animal world, with a selection from 3,000 species. The selection was based on invasiveness of the species, current, and just as importantly, potential spread and environmental, social and economic impacts. The concept of EPANS, or Established Pest Animals of National Significance, gained traction with the Australian Pest Animal Strategy in 2007. The concept probably hasn't gone as far as was originally envisaged back then in terms of formalising a list of species that are EPANS. The key criteria were the species had to be established and generally widely established, not just in a small area, in which case you'd probably be looking at other options like eradication or containment, but not eradicable. And the reality is that with currently available technologies, no widely established pest animal in Australia is eradicable. The term eradication is widely misused to sometimes to mean control, whereas in fact it's obviously the complete elimination of every single last animal. Feral camels, because of their low reproduction rate compared to most of the other pest animals in Australia, would actually be the best candidate for eradication, but even for feral camels, with current technologies, simply not viable, and it wouldn't be economically sensible to even make an attempt, which is why the focus has to be on setting a density target at which damage levels are more acceptable, and then aiming for and maintaining that density target. The vertebrate, the other criteria for an EPANS was that the National Vertebrate Pest Committee needed to assess that national coordination was required. Now, national coordination is clearly important for research activities and extension activities for all pest animals, but I don't think there are actually that many pest animals that can justify actual national coordination of implementation of management, as opposed to regional or jurisdictional coordination. And I'll show a graphic in a second to just show how important national coordination of actual management is with camels. So the requirements for EPANS plans and the current camel project has met all these requirements. As Glenn has just talked about, the first requirement is to define the pest animal problem, to justify why you'd undertake management in the first place. Outline management objectives and actions, and do that in a transparent way so people understand why you're doing what you're doing, and also that you can justify it on animal welfare grounds, etc. Involve all stakeholders, integrate the plan with other natural resource management plans, consider all management approaches, training requirements and legislation. The legislation review that was conducted for camels as part of the Desert Knowledge CRC process, and then South Australian Government, as through the current project processes, has done their own review, and it's kind of mind-boggling to see how much legislation and policy in some way links to camel management. It gets pretty complicated, both for whether you're aerial culling or commercial use. There are a lot of requirements. Promote coordinated action, obviously very important for a species that's as mobile as feral camels, and incorporate monitoring and evaluation, and you'll hear a lot about monitoring and evaluation this afternoon. So feral camels as an EPANS candidate. I think it's a very good candidate, although it hasn't been formalised as an EPANS as such. As you've just heard from Glenn, the Desert Knowledge CRC report provided the blueprint to address the EPANS requirements. And because of that proactive work, I guess feral camels were first cab off the rank as an informal EPANS. And as mentioned, I think they make a compelling case for nationally coordinated action, as this slide will show. So the population definitely established, over 3 million square kilometres, but also growing, as you saw that graph in Glenn's presentation, NT data only. It became clear in the 2000s that something needed to be done. They were on a growth trajectory with an unknown endpoint, and it was time to start thinking seriously about knocking that trajectory back. As you can see from the bottom graphic, that's satellite collaring data, Surveyor General's Corner, so the border between WA, South Australia and Northern Territory, and that's the sort of mobility of feral camels and the reason why you have to manage them across jurisdictions, not just within a jurisdiction. And as mentioned, low rate of reproduction. Other feral camel attributes, there's good removal options available. The aerial culling, ground culling, mustering, and importantly, all of these are accepted methods by Vertebrate Pest Committee, and there are standard operating procedures for all 3 methods to ensure the animal welfare and OH&S standards. There was definitely a will amongst all landholders to do something about feral camels before this project started. The only issue was working with landholders to work out which form of management they wanted, mustering, aerial culling, ground culling, or a combination of all 3, and then working with them to support that different form of management. And once again, referring back to Glenn's talk, there was a good information base. In terms of the National Feral Camel Action Plan, so in 2010, the NRM Ministerial Council endorsed that plan, and it was for a national plan for an established pest animal of national significance in accordance with the Australian Pest Animal Strategy. It's a bit of a mouthful. The objectives were to develop Australian, and I mean this, interesting in the days of the internet, and we've certainly experienced a bit of this with the current project. Not just Australian understanding, but also international understanding and support for humane management of feral camels. Other objective to address feral camel impacts, and these words are important, through immediate, substantial and sustained reduction in their numbers. The current project was a time-limited project. The population had to be knocked back quickly, which definitely affected which methods we can use in which areas. Importantly, it's only 3 years of operational rollout in this project. That was always only going to go so far. So an important, informal objective of the project was to build the platform for ongoing humane management of camels, and as part of that, to develop the partnerships and social capacities for feral camel management. And these are just some impact photos that I'll go through. You're going to see a lot more of this sort of stuff in more detail this afternoon, but sort of impacts at water points, both wetlands, which is the top photo, and then the inset photo is at a little rock hole. High browse lines on vegetation. Camels are the only animal in Australia that can produce a browse line that high. Infrastructure impacts on pastoral properties. You definitely hear a bit about this from Lindy Severin today, and you're talking major expense. You're not just talking about a little bit of fence line, you're talking about many kilometres of fence line being taken out, very expensive to replace. And even amazing photos like the bottom one, which is what happens when a mob of camels hangs around a watering point for a few days and puts the windmill under so much pressure that it eventually collapses. Extreme situations such as occurred before this project, with camels coming into communities in large numbers, and vehicle accidents. So even though the current project isn't formally linked to the National Feral Camel Action Plan, it's effectively been the main resource activity to date to address the objectives of that plan, and that will be an issue for all governments going forward, is what happens with the National Feral Camel Action Plan now. Is it just a document, or there's some resources behind it. The project has incidentally addressed most of the objectives and actions of that plan, but a lot of those objectives and actions are ongoing. They're not just, you've done them once and then that's it. So the project has demonstrated the potential for of the nationally coordinated approach to feral camel management, but as Tom mentioned, it's only the first step and sustained action is required. Thank you.